Greetings, my name is Jesse Reichor. I'm the designer of New York Noir, and today we're going to run through the tutorial and learn how to play the game. First thing we should say, however, is that New York Noir is not a traditional board game. There's no luck, there's no dice, there's no skill checks. You're basically playing through mystery cases and trying to solve the mystery. It's a narrative deductive game. It's mostly about reading a story, trying to understand what's going on, and trying to figure out where to go, who to visit, to learn more until you get to the end of the case. That's a little bit of elements of a choose-your-own-adventure game. Occasionally you'll be forced to make moral or psychological choices, but mostly this is deduction and solving a mystery. Let's open up the box and see what we get here. So we've got a little brochure about the game with some details. We don't need that. A guide to choosing what case to play first. You're always playing cases in New York Noir. You'll only play any given case once, then you understand the mystery. We've got our rule book here. We'll walk through that in a second. And at the top of the box here, I have 3 cases for New York Noir. We've got a short introductory demo case that'll take you about an hour or 2 to play. We'll try to get it done in an hour. We've got a medium length case called The Wrong Book, which will take you about 5 hours to play, probably. And then we've got Foxtrot East, which will probably take 13 or 14 hours to play. These cases are actually all part of a longer campaign that's connected. The career of one man who goes through from homicide cop and eventually a private investigator. The demo case that we're going to play today, The Past is a Crooked Game, is just a very gentle introduction to the character and sort of teaches you how to play as you go. That's the case we'll be playing here. We'll go through this in a second, but let's see what else we've got here. We've got 3 directories that we're not going to be using today for the demo case. We've got a criminal fingerprint directory that is used in some of the more advanced cases. We don't need that today. We've got a very brief street number guide. We won't need that either. And we've got a criminal history directory full of criminals and inmates. We won't need that today either. However, we will need the Map Atlas Neighborhood Guide, the white pages here, about 150 pages of people and businesses alphabetized by name, the yellow pages, which is just businesses, about 100 pages, and organized by category of business. And the reverse directory, which is a more advanced directory, which we will learn how to use. All of the cases have some basic stats. These are all produced and laid out by a tool that helps authors create cases. They always contain some basic information, the expected difficulty, when the case is set, if it's part of a campaign, where it fits in, expected playtime, any cautions or warnings. Now, I have printed out separate sheets for a couple sheets we'll use to keep track of our playthrough. These are actually included in the case book. You can see we've got a table of contents. Most of our time will be spent visiting leads. There is a table of contents to look up anything you're looking for. We'll see how all this works in a second. At the start of the case, we've got general instructions and tips for this specific case. And then, as I said, we've got these sheets that you would fill out as you play. So we've seen what's in a case. We'll come back to that very shortly. Let's take a look, however, at the rule book. The rule book teaches you how to play, what's in the box, how cases are broken down. Teaches you about some important concepts, markers, and keeping track of time, how to fill out these sheets. I'm going to walk you through all that. We'll learn it together. Then there's a longer discussion of how to use the directories, which I will teach you today. Some general tips on how to think about doing searches and making choices. More tips on thinking about how people behave in the city, and then an FAQ to answer some common and uncommon questions. Then we've got a couple of reference documents at the back of this rule book that are also available separately if you want to keep them nearby. The first is a very short guide to how people get around New York City, Manhattan in particular, walking, taking the subway, taking a bus, taxi cabs, private cars, and about leaving Manhattan. This is all to give you some idea of how long would it take someone to get from here to here, what kind of transportation would they use, how often do the subways run, stuff like that. We won't need that for our simple first case. We've got a research guide. This is sort of a list of common places, a 2-page list, common places you might go to look up information. So you've got various police department offices, court-related offices, government records, research records at the library, newspaper context, transportation stuff. Most of the time you won't need this, but occasionally you'll think, well, it would be nice if we could go look up parking tickets, and then this is a quick guide. It's not comprehensive. There are still lots of offices not listed here, but this is your sort of first list of potential places to go research something. Then we have a list of contacts. These are sort of friends and acquaintances from the campaign. In the demo case, this is not important, but as you get into the longer cases, there'll be friends you can visit to talk to and get advice about the case, etc. Okay, so that's our rule book and some reference guide. I think probably the best way to learn to play New York Noir is to jump into this demo case and learn as we play it. However, I do want to start with an overview of Manhattan and how to use the map atlas. Then we'll learn how to use the other directories as we go. Manhattan is a long strip of land, Manhattan Island, about 13 miles long, 3 miles wide. The cases in New York Noir largely take place in Manhattan, one of the boroughs of New York City. This book is essentially broken up into neighborhood. So we've got about 35 neighborhoods in Manhattan, each with its own history, demographics, and personality. Every neighborhood has a 2-letter abbreviation, and this book is sorted by that abbreviation. Then there's some extra sections in the back with maps of the other boroughs in New York City and some surrounding islands. Most of this map atlas is broken up into 2-page spreads. On the left, we have the neighborhood and some information about the neighborhood, its history, the kinds of crimes taking place, and points of interest. And then on the right, we have a map of that neighborhood. So the entire book essentially looks like that. Now, a map for a neighborhood. Let's take a closer look at it. The first thing you'll notice is that we've got numbered blocks. Most of Manhattan is laid out in a grid, not all of it. So you can see on the map, we've got street names. Streets generally run west to east, avenues north to south. Each block and they're typically less than 100 blocks in each neighborhood, but each block is numbered, and there are lots of buildings and residents within each block. So there's some art here of points of interest, landmark places, but these are mostly for flavor text, and same thing with the description here. On a given block, say block 2 in Bloomingdale, there may be many businesses along that block and many apartment buildings, etc. There are a couple of symbols to be aware of. You can see that we've got a symbol for a bus stop. There's one there, there's one there. We've got, that's these purple circled buses. Then we've got these orange subway symbols that are all over the place. Manhattan has lots of subway trains running underground and some above ground. So every time you see an orange subway, that means that's where there's an entrance into the subway system. Lots of people travel by subway in New York City, especially in Manhattan. The colors of the blocks are just denoting zoning, so the green blocks tend to be blocks with lots of park, the blue are residential, the gray are mixed. Then there's red for manufacturing, etc., but that's not that important. You'll also see a symbol here for a police precinct. In New York Noir, most of the neighborhoods sort of act like small towns. In every neighborhood, there'll be a police precinct, there'll be a firehouse designated for fire, there'll be lots of restaurants and bars and doctors, etc. But most people who live in a neighborhood will tend to stay in that neighborhood and patronize the stores in that neighborhood. The neighborhood they live, and occasionally the neighborhood where they work, if it's different. Sometimes they'll go to neighboring, bordering neighborhoods. And in fact, that's an important thing to note, that whenever we look at a map of a neighborhood, you can see there's a dotted line for adjacent neighborhoods. So in Bloomingdale, you can see we've got Morningside is off to the north, and the Upper West Side is to the south. You might also notice here in the bottom right, you can see an overview of Manhattan, just barely, and a mark about where Bloomingdale is on that overview. You'll see a larger view of that here. So here's Bloomingdale. That's the BD Bloomingdale neighborhood, and here it is again set in an overview of Manhattan. So each neighborhood, here is the Bowery, downtown near the southern edge of Manhattan, and you can see up to its northeast is the East Village, to its southwest is Little Italy, to its northwest is Greenwich Village, and directly south is Chinatown. So that's how this book looks. You can probably get away with playing most cases without ever needing to know where the spatial layout of neighborhoods and buildings are, but you will occasionally need to refer to the map atlas if you're following someone, or maybe a witness describes seeing someone go a certain way, then you may need to retrace their steps in this map. And then there are some other additional maps in this book that we won't need for today's game. All right, let's put that aside for now. Let's start by reading the introduction to this first demo case, The Past is a Crooked Game, and we'll get into these other directories as we go. All right, I am not going to read all of the text for this case, just because it's not necessary, but this is a game about reading. If you don't like reading, you're not going to enjoy this game. We get a little prelude where our main character in 1935 is remembering back to a day when he was a kid. visiting his father, a homicide cop. So here he is remembering this day back in 1915, which is what we're looking at here. All right, let's read this introduction just to situate ourselves. 10 a.m. Thursday, June 10th, 1915. It's my 14th birthday and I'm on summer vacation from school. I'm sitting in a wooden chair on the second floor of police headquarters on Center Street, facing my father, who's peering over his desk at me like the world is resting on his shoulders. Other kids might be hoping for a party or a new toy on their birthday, but me, there's no place I'd rather be. Jack, he says, how do you feel about giving your old man a hand today, helping me with something? There's a pause then where I should be answering him, but there's no words coming out of my mouth, and I'm in some kind of slow-motion trance. There's electricity in the air. There was a robbery yesterday at the bakery across the street, Jack. The thief may be armed with a knife, so you need to be careful. Do you understand? From the center drawer, he pulls out a sheet of paper and slides it over to me. Now, here's the first little boxed instruction of many in this case. This is something you'll get used to when you play the cases in York Noir, but here it's saying circle document 1 in your case log. You've gained access to document 1, which is a memo sheet on Jacob Thompson, which can be found at the back of this case book on page 39. So at the back of the case books are things like documents. If we look at the table of contents, you can see we've got these sort of introductory things. Each case is broken up into days. Here's day 1, day 2. Then the leads that we'll be spending most of our time following. Then we've got a list of documents, some end stuff, which is questions, epilogue, answers, and then a section for hints. There are the documents. There's only 2 documents in this case, but the instruction has told us right away what page it's on, page 39, which I could turn to here. Here is document 1. When you look at a document, it's got it listed in various places. It reminds you where you got it from, page 11. So we're going to go back to page 11 for a second and follow these instructions properly. Now, keeping good notes is essential when you're playing New York Noir. So let's take a look at these note sheets that are provided. Your case tracking sheet is what you'll use as you play the game. This is where you'll keep track of what documents you gain access to, what markers you get, any demerits, reputation bonuses, and other things. Then on each day of the case, most cases are broken into multiple days. The demo case only has 2 virtual days, but the longer cases may have a whole week of cases. You would use a sheet for each day of the case. So we just need a double-sided sheet here. So we're going to start off here by recording normal stuff. This is past is a crooked game. And we have a way of keeping track when we've played it and our final score. That might be important if we're playing a whole long campaign. The game instructions have just told us to circle that we have access to document 1. That will help us keep track so we can go back and reread that as we play. Much of what we're doing here and here is keeping track of information so that we can go revisit it if we get lost. So I might write here for my own notes that this is a memo on Jacob. Our daily log sheet is going to be used to track our time spent in every lead we read, again, so that we can go back and reread stuff. So let's put this aside for a second and return here. Now, we know we can read this document whenever we want. We could look it up in the table of contents and read it. But generally, when I play cases of New York Noir, I use a little list of documents printed out separately in envelopes. So for this case, the Crooked Past, there are only 2 documents. So we'll use these in this separate envelope here. We don't need the rest of them. It's helpful to have the documents printed out separately so that you can keep them nearby and refer to them. So we don't have access to document 2 yet, but we have just gotten access to document 1. So let's take a look at what it is. That's a police memo on Jacob Thompson, age 18-20, Caucasian, occupation taxi cab driver, question mark. On the afternoon of Wednesday, June 9th, suspect was seen by witnesses running from the Tellerico Bakery in Little Italy, which had just been robbed. Suspect description by bakery owners was unclear. No answer to knocking on door of suspect's last known home address. Someone identifying themselves as Thompson called into police headquarters Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. agreed to come in for a sit-down interview on Thursday, June 10th at 8 a.m. Okay, let's keep this handy. We may need it. The campaign log is used to track things between cases in a campaign. We're not going to need that today. All right, let's keep reading our father talking to us. He says, this guy here is our main suspect, Jacob Thompson. He was supposed to come in this morning for an interview. He never showed. So we need to find him. There's a long pause, but I still haven't found my voice, and I can't take my eyes off the sheet in front of me. I do it myself, Jack. I need to be here to answer the phones, and everyone else is busy. I turn to look around the bullpen, but he stops me. Jack, look at me, he says, and I turn back to him. You don't have to bring him in. You just have to find him. Do you understand? I still can't speak, but I nod my head. Yes, I understand. Okay, he says, good. He opens a desk drawer near his left foot and pulls out a stack of books, which he drops on the desk with a loud thump. If you're going to be useful, you're going to need to familiarize yourself with these directories. Have a look through them. When you're ready for some tips on how to use them, let me know. So here in this story, in this demo case, he basically teaches you how to use the directories, which I'm going to do now. So let me take a moment to teach you how to use those directories, and then we'll get back to the story here. So we've already looked at the map atlas, so you know how to navigate around neighborhoods. I haven't shown you how to look up anything yet, but this will give you some good idea of how to spatially orient yourself. So we've got 3 main directories: white pages, yellow pages, and reverse directory. Let's start with the white pages. The white pages is every person and business in Manhattan listed alphabetically. So we might, for example, want to look up Jacob Thompson. So let's look up TH. All right, so here's Thompson. Scrolling down here, I see Thompson with a P, Thompson without a P, and there's Thompson Jacob. That looks like probably who we're interested in. After the name, you can see the actual street address, 303 East 8th Street. Normally you can ignore this street address, and I'll show you why. Because the next column tells us the neighborhood he lives in and the block in that neighborhood. So Jacob Thompson, who lives on 303 East 8th Street, lives on the 12th block of the Lower East Side. So if we wanted to see where that is, we could open this up, find the LE neighborhood, which is the Lower East Side, and look up the 12th block in the Lower East Side, which is right there. So somewhere in this block is Jacob Thompson's home address. Okay, that's fine. Next, we have a column that has a lead number. The lead numbers are what you're going to be using to look up in your casebook to go talk to this person. You might think of it as formatted like a phone number, but when you look up a lead, generally you're going and knocking on that door. So when we start the game, if we want to visit Jacob Thompson's home address, we would look up 28920 in our casebook, and go visit Jacob Thompson, which we will surely try to do in a second. But let me show you the other directories first. The Yellow Pages is very similar to the White Pages. The columns for each entry are the same. We've got the name, the street address, the neighborhood and block number, and then the lead number. What's different about the Yellow Pages is that it's only businesses and government offices and stuff, not residents, and it's organized by category. So you see we have accountants, advertising agencies, agriculture, amusements, and so on. You probably want to familiarize yourself with the general organization of categories so that if you're looking for something, you'll be like, oh, I remember there was an entry for pawnbrokers, etc. There's an additional page at the front for less common categories and where to find them. So if you're looking for interior design, you should see furniture. If you're looking for magazines, look under newspapers and magazines, etc. So here we have the categories organized by type. Now you'll remember we saw something about Jacob Thompson used to be a taxi cab driver, or is a taxi cab driver. So if we wanted to check out taxi cab companies, we could go to taxi cabs. Of course, we could look this up in the index of the Yellow Pages as well, but here's taxi cabs and limos. Again, we've got name, street address, neighborhood and block number, and then the lead number to visit them. Every neighborhood in Manhattan, in New York Noir, will have a taxi cab company that is in control of that neighborhood. So if someone gets in a cab in a certain neighborhood, you might visit the taxi cab company of that neighborhood. However, in general, if someone's taking a taxi cab from A to B, different neighborhoods, you might also want to visit neighborhood B, the destination neighborhood. They might know where the person got off, or it might be their cab. But in general, each neighborhood is serviced by its own police precinct, its own taxi cab company, its own firehouse, etc. All right, that's the Yellow Pages. The reverse directory, which we will return to in a moment, but let me just give you an overview. The reverse directory is organized by neighborhood, much like the map directory, the map atlas. But the reverse directory can tell you what businesses and people are in any given block. So when we looked up Jacob Thompson, we found that he was lived in the 12th block of the Lower East Side on 8th Street. So if we look up the Lower East Side in this 250-page book, let's find the Lower East Side, the LE neighborhood. Okay. Here's the Lower East Side. Each block has its own section. So we know he was in the 12th block. So here are all of the people and businesses in the 12th block. There's a community garden on Avenue C. We have Shelley Rosenblum on 8th Street. These are different people in different buildings on 8th Street. And there's Jacob Thompson, 303 East 8th Street. Notice the lead number here will be the same lead number as we found in the White Pages entry for Jacob. But there's no neighborhood and block column. That's because we already know it's in the LE neighborhood, Lower East Side, block 12. So the reverse directory can be very useful when you want to find out who else lives or works or has a business on a block, or maybe who's across the street. So if a witness said, I saw someone across the street dart upstairs to the second floor, then we could look up the block that's across the street, see what's on that second floor landing, etc. Okay, so those are the directories. There are a couple of subtleties that maybe I'll show you now because it may be relevant. And then we'll get back to the case. So the one important thing I want to show you has to do with apartment buildings. Lots of people in Manhattan live in large apartment buildings. If we just turn to a random page, for example, let's find someone. Okay. So here's Mary Kershaw. She lives at 336 Central Park West in apartment 2B. Now let's say we had a case where Mary Kershaw was murdered. Well, we can go visit her apartment by going to the Bloomingdale neighborhood, and there's her lead. But she's killed in an apartment building. Maybe we want to talk to her neighbors and see if they heard anything. So how could we do that? This is alphabetical by name of the person. The yellow pages is by category. We really want to know who lives in that apartment building with her. So that's another use for the reverse directory. So let's turn to Bloomingdale and the 83rd block of Bloomingdale. So here's Bloomingdale 83. Now you'll notice that there is her apartment building, 336 Central Park West. And there's Mary Kershaw. The listing here is by apartment number. So we can see that Mary Kershaw is in apartment 2B. That's the lead number, which will match the same lead number in the white pages for Mary. But here now we can see that apartment 2A is Joseph Sakine. There's his lead. And apartment 2C is Riho. And then there's all these other people in her apartment building. So if you wanted to knock on the neighbors to the left and right of her or above and below her, you could do that. You'll also notice for every apartment building that there is an entry, a top-level entry for the building itself. So in this case, 336 Central Park West has its own lead entry, 72246. That's a lead you'd visit if you wanted to talk to the doorman or the maintenance person at the apartment building. Every apartment building will have an entry for that. Okay, I think that's sufficient for us on how to use the directories to get back to our case. I spend a few minutes at the desk looking through the books and directories until my father finally gets up and says, "Okay then, I'll leave you to it, Jack. There's 3 things I need you to do for me. First, get confirmation that this guy is our robber. Second, figure out whether he was working alone or with an accomplice. And third, figure out where we can find him to pick him up. Oh, and if someone gives you a hard time, you show them this." And then it says circle document 2. So you remember how this goes. We're going to go to our case tracking sheet, circle document 2. This is a deputy detective note. So I'm just going to write that here for my own records. And we're going to go get document 2, which is a simple note from our father. The bearer of this note, Jack Deverell, has been deputized as a junior detective of the New York City Police Department. Your cooperation is appreciated. NYPD Homicide Department, Detective Sam Deverell, 72821. So you'll recognize this as a lead number that we could visit. So I guess we could call our father at this phone number or show it to someone. So I'm going to put this with my other document. And we'll continue reading here. Jack, if you do figure out where this guy's at, you keep your distance. Just pick up a payphone, tell them to connect you to me at the number on that sheet, and we'll pick him up. Or call me if you get stuck. My father... Oh, maybe he's at home, I say, sheepishly. My father chuckles and ruffles my hair, then sits back down and leans over the desk to look me in the eye. I don't think it's going to be that easy, Jack. You're going to have to get out there and get your hands dirty, knock on a few doors, ask some questions. You understand? Check out the scene of the crime with your own eyes. Talk to witnesses. Figure out who you can trust and who's lying to you. What do you think? You think you're up for it? I looked from my father back down to the books on his desk. Think of it like chasing down loose ends, Jack. It doesn't really matter where you start as long as you don't forget to chase down all the loose ends. He reaches down and slides open the center drawer of his desk. Now, some guys trust their gut, but me, I trust my notebook. And with that, he pulls out a brown leather padded notebook and puts it in front of me. This is for you, he says, and he taps on the notebook slowly with his index finger. Keep good notes, Jack. That's how you solve a case. Good notes, you understand? Yes, sir, I say, still not looking up from the desk. Good man, he says. Then I feel his reassuring hand on my back and he's gone and I'm all alone with my books, trying to decide where to start. All right, now we get some instructions which are very typical for the start of each day of the case. First, it says to record a mandatory event on our schedule. So schedule is going to be our daily log here. And the way we record an event is down here on scheduled events. So it's saying we should record a 5 p.m. event. So I'm going to write down 5 p.m. And it's telling us where to go, what to read at 5 p.m. 5-6845. Tells us the page number, but I don't need to write that down. I'll look that up in the table of contents. And the instructions say that when we reach this time, we're going to trigger this event. So we always keep track of time as we play. It's not so important that you be super strict about time. If you forget to record a time that you spent, it's not going to be a big deal. And then it's telling us that we're ready to start our day. So it says on the log sheet, record that it's day one, Thursday, June 10th. Okay, this just helps you keep track and keep good records. And it says the current time is 10 a.m. So I'm going to write 10 a.m. up here. The rule book walks you through this, but basically we're going to keep track of what leads we visit, at what time, any notes, whether we want to remember to return there on a future day or time. And then we'll just keep updating that and keep track of what time it is as we go. Eventually we'll get to 5 p.m. That'll be the end of the current day. If we turn the page here, we see the book is telling us stop. Stop reading this casebook now. Begin searching for leads in the directories. Don't turn the page. You should have set an event which will trigger at the end of day one, which will instruct you on what to do when the day ends. So that's basically us on our own now. From 10 a.m. until 5 p.m. If we ever run out of stuff to do, you could just wait it out and go to the end event. We'll see what happens at the end of day event, but the game is going to keep us from getting too far off track. Make sure that we're minimally investigating this case. So let's put this off nearby. Maybe we'll just put it off over here. We'll open our case up to our table of contents. Now, in the printed version, you have to be a little careful not to read stuff that you're not meant to read yet. If you're playing this case online on a digital device with a PDF, you can download a version of this case or any of the other cases, which has only one lead per page, so it's a little harder to read stuff accidentally. Now, when I'm playing these cases, I like to have some index cards where I keep track of all the things I want to follow up on so I don't forget. It's very easy to forget to do something. But in this gentle intro case, it's not so bad. We've got the name of our suspect. We can look up his home address. We know he used to be a taxi driver, so we might visit taxi companies. And then, of course, we've got the scene of the crime. Well, let's start by going to his home address, since we already looked that up at one point. So Jacob Thompson, assuming it's the right, that we have the right Jacob Thompson, let's look him up again. Jacob Thompson on 8th Street, Lower East Side, Block 12, 28920. So we're going to, before we go to any lead, we're going to write it in our book. you've got two columns here. Some people like to record the location on a map and the lead separate. Me, I just use one. I use them both for that and split the number up. It's a little easier for me to avoid forgetting the number. So 28920. So our next step is to look that up in our casebook. Well, here it is, 28920. If there was no entry for it, it just means it's not relevant for our case or we can't find it, etc. So page 26, let's go to 8920. We'll try to avoid reading stuff that's not relevant. You can see we've got an entry that we're reading, a little recap of what's at that location to make sure we're at the right place. It says time elapsed is 60 minutes. So we're going to go back to our log sheet and write that after this it's going to be 11 a.m., an hour later. The idea of knocking on Jacob Thompson's door fills me with dread. The whole block seems run down and dangerous. I spend 15 minutes across the street hoping I'll spot him leaving and trying to work up the courage to cross the street. Finally, I come up with a story in my head about looking for a lost dog, but I feel a wave of relief when no one answers the door. As I'm about to leave, an old woman with curlers in her hair and a small poodle in her arms sticks her head out of the next door window. "You looking for Jacob?" she asks. "I lost my dog," I say, without thinking. She looks down at her poodle as if to check that it's hers. Do you know Mr. Thompson?" I ask, regaining my wits. "Mr. Thompson," she says, with not a small amount of disdain, "was evicted last month. I think he went uptown to live with his cousin. Trying to avoid the law, no doubt." "Do you know his cousin's name?" I ask. "I don't remember his first name. I remember he said his last name was almost the same as his, only slightly different." Okay, so we might want to make some notes in our log sheet. Maybe you prefer to keep these in a separate document. For a simple case, I've got plenty of room here. So we might write down where we went. I'm just going to write down this is Jacob's old home. He's evicted. And what does she say? He moved uptown. He moved uptown with his cousin who has a similar last name. Now we could try to find the cousin. He's got a similar last name. We're already up on Thompson. Well, we've got a little bit of a problem here. There are some other Thompsons, but she said his last name of the cousin was similar but different. Now, we've got a whole list of Thompsons with a P. That seems like a good candidate, or maybe a Thomas. However, we've got a bit of a problem. There are maybe 25 Thompsons in the phone book and another 25 Thomases in the phone book. In New York Noir, you're never going to be expected to go visit 30 places to try to find someone. There'll always be a way to narrow it down to a small handful, maybe 4 or 5. So if you ever find yourself looking at a candidate list of 30 places, you know that you've missed something. Or there's something that you'll get later that will help you filter it down. Now in this case, we actually can filter it down a little because we know he moved uptown. So we'll be looking for a neighborhood that's uptown. We could go through these and see which of these are uptown. Uptown's a little bit of a fuzzy word here in Manhattan. Sometimes people use it to just mean further north than they are. Sometimes people mean uptown as a very specific, more narrow range of locations. In our case, however, I like to carve the chicken at its joints, as they say, and not go knocking on doors when we have other leads to pursue. Let's look at the low-hanging fruit before we start scattershot trying long shots. So we're just going to table this issue of his cousin uptown where he might be living. And let's pursue the next obvious lead, which might be the scene of the crime. So what were we told? We were told the name of the bakery that was robbed, the Tellerico Bakery in Little Italy. So we could look up the Tellerico Bakery in the white pages. It'll be there. In fact, it's probably easier to do that. Let's just look it up under T. There it is, Tellerico and Brothers Bake Shop, Little Italy 20, 11978. So that's going to be our next place to go, 11978. In this case, I'm going to write down it's the bakery, Tellerico. I'm also going to write down the block number. We were told Little Italy 20. Now, as an example, however, if you didn't know the exact name, or maybe we couldn't find it, maybe the actual bakery was called like Sampson and Tellerico Bakery. So you look up Tellerico and it's not there because it's alphabetical. Well, we could instead get out the yellow pages, look up bakeries, page 13. Here we've got a half a page of bakeries, and we could scan through looking up Little Italy. We know the bakeries in Little Italy. Now, in this case, Little Italy happens to be full of bakeries. It's the most common neighborhood for a bakery, but you could see we got candidates. We've got Butter and Biscuits, Cafe Roma Bakery, Cake Heaven, Ferrara Bakery and Cafe, and here's Tellerico and Brother Bake Shop. So if we couldn't find it in the white pages for whatever reason, here we could find it pretty quickly in the yellow pages. Again, same address, same block number, same lead number, same information in the yellow pages as in the white pages. Okay, let's go visit Tellerico Bakery, 11978. So we could look it up in the table of contents, but it's all alphanumeric, so we just turn to 1, and here we have it. Time 60 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and say the next place we go is going to be at 12 noon. And let's read our entry. When I show my deputy detective note to the guy behind the counter at Tellerico and Brother Bakery, I'm treated like a celebrity. He sits me down at a small stool, cuts me a big slice of sourdough bread, and smears some butter on it. Try this, kid. It's just out of the oven. I'm here about the robbery, I say. I bet you are, he says, and stands up and puts his hands behind his back and starts pacing in front of me as he tells me what happened. It's like this. Yesterday afternoon, I was working at the counter, just like today. This guy comes in demanding all the money in the register. And he had a knife, I ask? No knife. Oh, yeah, he was just a young fella. I suppose I could have argued with him, but it was a slow day. We only had a couple of dollars in the till. I figured it was easier just to give it to him. For a moment, I find myself staring at my shoes, rubbing the back of my head and lost in thought. Eventually, I come back to earth and bite into a piece of bread. Then what happened? I ask while chewing. Well, I gave him the money, of course, and off he ran. We both look out the front door in silence. Then I ask, well, which way did he run? Which way did he run? He repeats back to me, then to himself as he continues pacing. Which way did he run? That's a good question. South, I think. I pull out the suspect sheet and show it to him. And this is the guy? This is the guy who robbed you? Well, I didn't recognize the guy, he says. He had a mask on. Then he remembers something. I think the lady who runs the bar down on Mulberry saw him. He dropped his mask right in front of her. I finish the last bite of bread and thank him for his cooperation. Okay, so he gives us a little more information. He says he ran south past the bar on Mulberry. So this might be a good excuse for us to break out our map. So we know the bakery is on block 20 of Little Italy. So let's turn to Little Italy. Block 20 is right here. That's where Tellerico Bakery is. He said the guy ran south and went past a bar on Mulberry Street. Well, this is Mulberry Street, so the guy ran this way. We don't know how far down south he went. So we have a couple options here. We could look for bars in the yellow pages and see if there's a bar in 20, in 21, in 27, 28, 35, 36, 45, 46. That seems like a reasonable thing. We could look up the yellow pages, look for bars and bars in Little Italy and see if there are any on Mulberry Street. That's another way. Either way, we should be able to find our place. Maybe just for fun, though, we'll use the reverse directory. Find Little Italy. Okay, so what blocks do we think this bar should be on if he ran south down Mulberry? Probably 20, 21, 27, 28, 35, 36. So let's look up. We're looking for bars in block 20. And you can see in the reverse directory, there's little abbreviations for the kind of business. So we've got, there's the Tellerico Bake Shop in block 20. It says bake. Then we've got a pet store, another bake store, a drug store. We said 20, and we said 21 maybe. There's a firehouse, clothing store, stove repair. 27. Remember, we're looking for bars. 27 has some police offices, magazine, some residents. 28, another bakery, cheeses, ravioli market, food shop, soup kitchen, dentist, Mulberry Street bar on Mulberry Street. That seems like a very good candidate for us. 58755. 58755. This is going to be the Mulberry bar. Alternatively, if we were having trouble finding it this way, again, we could have looked up bars in the yellow pages. Page 14. Now, there are a lot of bars, so there's a lot to go through, but we know it's in Little Italy on Mulberry Street, so we could just scan through these bars, looking for ones in Little Italy. For L-I, 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 L-I. Here's one in L-I, the Engine and Tap on Mott Street. That doesn't sound right. It's on block 12. That's far from where we want. Keep going. Here's the Golden Crown on Leonard Street, Little Italy 58. That's too far. Here's the Hidden Cellar, Little Italy 23. Here's the Mulberry Street bar. On Mulberry Street, Little Italy 28, 58755. So just to show you two different ways you could find the same information. Now, of course, if this was down near the south of Little Italy, we'd also have to consider the possibility that this person ran and crossed neighborhoods. In this case, though, we got lucky. So let's go visit the Mulberry Street bar, 58755. 58755, page 32. Okay, here we are at the Mulberry Street bar. 60 minutes passes, so it'll be 1 p.m. on the next visit. All eyes turn to me as I push through the swinging door at the Mulberry Street bar. Well, there's only one guy in the place, a tiny old man hunched over a small, dirty-looking glass of brown liquid. There's a rather plump woman in long pants and an oversized long-sleeved white shirt wiping down a table near the entrance. What can I get you? She asks without skipping a beat. I look up at the chalkboard above the bar for a moment as if I'm thinking about what I want to drink. Then I remember why I'm here. I'm investigating the robbery that happened at the bakery yesterday. Are you now? She says, looking me over. Yes, ma'am. I understand you may have gotten a good look at the bad guy. I sure did, she says. It was Jacob. Are you quite sure? Oh, yeah. He was a regular. I was outside the bar when he came running by, practically ran me over. Jacob Thompson. Yep, that's the one. And then what happened, I asked. Well, he was running pretty fast. He dropped his mask, then turned left at the corner of Hester at the newsstand. Then he was gone. Did you happen to see what happened to the mask, I ask. Police got it, she says. Then we get an instruction to circle marker A1. So this is the first marker we've gotten. So we're going to turn to our case tracking sheet. In the left-hand side, we see markers. We're going to circle A1. Markers are used a lot in cases to help keep track of what evidence you found, what encounters you had, what decisions you made. And you might have branching points. Maybe you can ask about something if you found a certain marker. And at the end of the day, these cases will all check to make sure you've visited certain places by checking your markers. We'll see that when we get to the end of today. Let's return to our notes here. What do we want to write down here? She tells us how he escaped. He turned left at Hester. He almost knocked her over, turned left at Hester. Maybe we want to write down that he dropped his mask. The police seem to already have it, though. All right, well, if he went left at Hester, at the newsstand, it says, at the newsstand at Hester. So let's go back to our map here. So she's in 28. She says he went down to Hester and turned left. Probably she means left as she was watching him, so that would be turning down here. So maybe we should be looking for a newsstand at 35, 36, 45, or 46. So let's do that. Let's return to our reverse directory and look up 35, 36, 45, and 46. Let's try to find a newsstand. 35 has abandoned property, bakery, Little Italy news and magazines on block 36 on Hester Street. That seems like a very good candidate for us. 25808. 25808. Let's try that. Sure enough, there's an entry. 60 minutes past, so it's now going to be 2 p.m. next. The squat, middle-aged guy at the newsstand tells me, never removing the cigar from his mouth, that he did see someone run by him yesterday in an unnatural hurry and jump in the passenger seat of a waiting yellow taxicab. He says the guy had short black hair, was about 6 foot, and the driver was wearing a bowler hat but had long black straggly hair underneath it. Circle marker D1. So let's go circle marker D1. Now we've got some new information that seems relevant to us. First, we've got a description of the guy. Short black hair, 6 foot. 6 foot, short black hair. This should be Jacob, but he's in the passenger seat of a driver with the bowler hat. Bowler hat. Black straggly hair. Now, there's something a little odd about that. Like, you don't get in the passenger seat of a taxi cab normally. You would get in the back. So what does that mean? And where do we go next? It does seem like we should follow through on this taxi cab angle. We know Jacob used to be a taxi driver. Now here he is jumping into a taxi cab, but in the passenger seat. So maybe we should look up the taxi cab company in Little Italy where he just got in a cab. So let's look up taxi cabs in the yellow pages. page 94, and see if we can find the taxi cab company for Little Italy. So here's taxi cabs. Let's scroll down till we find Little Italy. Little Italy Cabs, 476.5 Broadway, block 24, 34564. So let's write it down so we don't forget it. 34564. This is Little Italy Cabs. You might want to make sure there's no other cab company in Little Italy. That tends to be only one per neighborhood. Okay, let's go talk to Little Italy Cabs. 34564. Little Italy Cabs, not 60 minutes, so it's now going to be 3 p.m. Never heard of him, kid, says the overweight dispatcher from his perch at the Little Italy Cab Depot, when I ask about Jacob Thompson. Is your guy Italian? Most of our drivers are locals to Little Italy. All right, so that's a washout. He doesn't know him. He doesn't know who we're talking about. So the question is, where do we go next? What angle should we pursue next? We've been to the scene of the crime. We've been to his house. We've been to the Little Italy taxi cab. Where would you go next? All right, it's 3 p.m. here. We've got a couple hours left before the end of the day, but we don't know quite where to go. If we were playing one of the longer cases, we would have a big list of our contacts and allies. We could just go visit them, say hello, see what's going on. We might think, well, we could look at our research guide. We could see if there are any places we might think of going. There is a taxi and limo licensing commission. There is a centralized taxi info. Well, we don't have anything better to do. Maybe we'll go there. We could try to find the cousin's name, knock on a couple doors. Let's try the central CAD coordinator, 42821 from our detective's research guide. All right, let me put that entry in. We're going to knock on that door. 42821. 2821. 42821. 60 minutes. The Central Taxi Cab Office tells me to go visit individual neighborhood taxi cab companies if I'm trying to locate a specific driver. Well, that wasn't much help. 4 p.m. All right, well, I'm not sure what to do. So we're just going to call it a day. We're going to end a little early by just advancing it to 5 p.m. and triggering this end of day event. So let's see what that looks like. 56845. That's the event we previously scheduled at the start of the day. 56845. Okay, so this is something we'll get used to looking at. This is an end of day event. Let's read what it says. It tells us where we scheduled this. It's 5 p.m. Thursday, June 10th. Day number 1 is ending. The following 2 items must be found before you move on. Marker A1 and D1. So let's look at our case tracking sheet. We actually did find A1 and D1. So let's follow these instructions. Record +1 reputation for each of these we found and +2 bonus if we found both. So actually we found 2 and a bonus 2 since we found both of them. This will help our score. Now, if we hadn't found them, if we hadn't found these 2 markers, we got 1 at the scene of the crime, maybe 1 from the newspaper stand guy. I'm not sure exactly where we got them. But if we hadn't found them, the game tells us we're now in overtime. Go back out. It's still day 1. Do whatever investigating you have to find until you find them. If we still got lost, and let's say we never found D1 and we couldn't figure out where to go, we could go in the back of the book and look up a hint for marker D1. And you can see it's a ladder of hints. Let's just take a look at it. Let's pretend we hadn't found marker D1. It says, whenever we have a criminal escaping from a crime scene, we should try to retrace his steps as far as possible. We might be able to figure out how he made his getaway and whether he had assistance. And then this says, if this is helpful, mark 2 demerits. You get a little bit of a penalty in your score for doing that. And then if you still need more help, you can take another hint. Tells us where to go for our second hint. And then if we still need more help, even more, we can give ourselves more penalty and just go directly to where marker D1 was assigned. So essentially the game will make sure you never get completely lost and you see the critical clues. It's not going to guarantee you see everything, but this end of day checks will guarantee that you see the critical stuff. Okay, returning back now to that end of day event. As soon as you have found both items, proceed to evening on day 1 at page 16. All right, so let's do that. Let's go to page 16 and read how day 1 wraps up. I don't remember much of that evening in the summer of 1915. I think I walked in the front door, headed straight to my room. I wanted to record my thoughts while they were still fresh in my mind and work out my plans for the next day. I remember my mom calling me down for dinner, but I asked to take mine to my room so I could keep writing. Normally, she'd never stand for that. Dinner was family time. But that day, she said it was okay. Then later, before bed, my sister Penny came in to play me something she had just learned on her trumpet. Maybe she was just playing scales, but my memories of that day are untrustworthy, and in my mind's eye, she's playing something magical from another world. Okay, then we turn the page. It says stop, turn the page when you're ready to begin day 2. Okay, well, we're ready to begin day 2. Let's take a look at what's happening on day 2. It's 8 a.m. Friday, June 11th. I barely slept last night thinking about Jacob Thompson and how to find him. I'm out of bed at the first hint of sunlight through the window, then into the kitchen for a bowl of cereal. Pop's still asleep, but my mother's in the kitchen, sitting at the table doing her crosswords and humming some classical tune to herself. I bounce down at the table, and she pushes the box of cornflakes from the center of the table over to my empty bowl without looking up. I pull over the newspaper and glance through the headlines and adverts. So we have a little excerpt from the newspaper, 4 little stories. Might be relevant to our case, might not. We've got a presidential address, some local news about subway stations being built, some local ice cream parlor promotion event at Horton's Ice Cream, and then an advert for medicated Dr. Earl's medicated earplugs. You're headed out to find your bad guy today, I suppose, she asks, head down and black pen scribbling in her crosswords. Yes, ma'am, I say. I suppose your father has told you to be careful out there on your own. I'm always careful, Mom, I say. Her head stays down, focused on the crosswords, but her pen isn't moving, and I see her eyebrows raise up. I have my doubts, she seems to say. Then she pushes her crosswords aside and looks at me seriously, catching my attention and causing me to freeze with the spoon at my mouth. Just remember, Jack, she says, what your father does, it's not a game, you know. People get hurt doing what he does. You have to take it seriously. Then she reconsidered slightly. I mean, yes, it is a game in a way, but it's not a game. Do you understand? I nod, though I'm not sure I do. Then we sit together in silence for a bit before I put my bowl in the sink and head out the door with just enough change to ride the subway to Manhattan and back. All right, so we're starting a new day, day 2, so we'll use the other side of this sheet. It says we should schedule a 7 p.m. end of day event, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. 7 p.m. We're supposed to read 54291. And yes, it's mandatory. Okay, you're now ready to start your day. On a blank case log sheet, record that it's day 2, which is Friday, June 11th. This tutorial case is only 2 days, so this is going to be our final day. We haven't gotten too many new leads. No big events have happened. We've got a couple newspaper leads we might follow up on. Neither of them really seems related to our case, though. So we could try visiting the ice cream store. We could try checking out this earplug guy, but they don't really seem related to our case. So I'm more inclined to think that maybe there was something missing that we didn't follow up on that we should have. Now, if we really got lost, we could just advance the day to 7 p.m. and say we're not going to go anywhere. We'll just go to the end of the day, and then we'll get some demerits and be nudged about some markers we're missing. But I think we could figure this one out on our own. There's definitely something fishy with the taxi cab situation, and we really do need to find the cousin's house. But one thing that might occur to us is that Jacob Thompson, who had a profession as a taxi driver, the robbery was in Little Italy at the bakery shop. But Jacob Thompson didn't live in Little Italy. He lived in the Lower East Side. Here. So if he lived in the Lower East Side, which is, you can see, quite a bit east of Little Italy, maybe he worked in the taxi cab company in the Lower East Side, not in Little Italy. So let's try visiting the taxi cab company that services the Lower East Side. Let's look up taxi cab companies. Let's look for Lower East Side. Here's City Wheels Taxi in the Lower East Side. Any others? No. All right, let's try that one then. There's our log sheet. So if we go to City Wheels Taxi, Lower East Side 13, 88699, 88699. This is City Wheels on the Lower East Side 13. And what time did we start our day that we forgot to record? 8 a.m. Okay, 88699. Let's see if this hunch pays off. Table of contents 88699, page 36. City Wheels Taxi, 16 minutes past, and now it's 9 a.m. Jacob in trouble again, is he? He says the skinny mustachioed guy working the desk in the City Wheels front office. Yes, sir, I say. He's wanted for robbery, or he's a witness to a robbery. Well, I can't help you, kid. He used to work for us, but last I heard he moved in with his cousin Richard up in Harlem. He's a cabbie, too. But let the police handle it, kid. Harlem's no place for you. All right, so that seems like we may have gotten a big lead there. We know now his cousin's name is Richard, and now we have a specific, we've narrowed down where Richard lives, that it's in Harlem. And then perhaps the biggest little clue is that Richard is also a cabbie. So maybe now we have enough to find his cousin's house. Harlem is uptown. So let's take a look at our overview of Manhattan. Harlem is actually broken into, there's several neighborhoods, Harlem. There's North Harlem, Central Harlem, Italian Harlem, and Spanish Harlem. So we have 4 candidates neighborhoods where Richard, his cousin, lives. We could try taxi companies there in each of these neighborhoods, but maybe this is now enough to find his cousin whose last name is like his. So let's go back to our Thompson area and let's look for a Thompson in one of the Harlems: North Harlem, Central Harlem, Italian Harlem, or Spanish Harlem. And we know his first name is Richard. So we're looking for a Richard Thompson or Richard Thomas. Here's a Robert, a Rose, Thomas. Here's an R Thompson. R Thompson and Jacob Thompson. That's a very similar last name. And he's in Central Harlem. That seems like a very good candidate. R Thompson with an E in Central Harlem. Okay, that feels like that's our guy. So he's in, let's put Richard or R Thompson with an E. He's in CH 61, which is 78927. Okay. Let's go to 78927. See what we can get. Okay, this looks promising. 60 minutes passed, so next lead is going to be at 10 a.m. Thompson R. The Monterey Apartments building is a short little structure, just 2 stories tall, with no doorman in sight and open to the street. The sidewalk is bustling with activity, and I hear strange discordant notes of music from some place nearby that I can't quite wrap my head around. I walk past the maintenance guy's apartment on the ground floor, head upstairs to apartment 2D, which is where Thompson is. After a long while, the door cracks open, but only a few inches wide. "Yeah," says the thin voice from behind the door. "I'm looking for my dog," I say, a bit unsure of myself. "I haven't got a dog," says the man. "Is Jacob Thompson here?" I ask without skipping a beat. There's a long pause. "Is that your dog's name?" he asks. "No, but Mr. Thompson might have seen my dog. He went missing down on 8th Street. "You're a long way from 8th Street, kid," says the voice without a face. "I ain't seen Jacob in weeks. Go back to your own neighborhood, kid. You don't belong uptown." And with that, he closes the door and I hear it lock. Okay, so that's very suspicious. But what do we do with that? We remember that our assignment was to identify the robber, find out if he had accomplices, and figure out where to catch him. So if we couldn't do any better, maybe this apartment is a good candidate to tell the police to find him, but we don't know. I mean, for all we know, we were actually talking to Jacob Thompson. We couldn't see anyone. So what next? We could go to taxi companies in Harlem, but we remember that he's in an apartment building. We even walked past the maintenance guy's room. So let's not leave this apartment building so quick. Let's see if we can talk to his neighbors and maybe the maintenance guy. So you remember how to do that. We're going to get the reverse directory. We're going to look at Central Harlem Block 61. And we're going to find out who else is in this apartment building. So here's the Monterey Apartments where we just were. So let's make some notes. We've got the doorman, which is the top level entry. Doorman or maintenance guy, which is here. So maybe we'll go to 17062. And while we're here, let's look at Thompson's neighbors. So there's Thompson R, apartment 2D. We just went there. We've got a J Billups in the apartment on one side of it, which is 51068. And then the apartment on the other side, Elias Ivanov, 2E, is 51290. These feel like reasonable next three places to go. So let's just set this aside and visit these places. 17062. This is the maintenance person or doorman. Okay, 30 minutes. So it's now 10:30. Let's see what he says. On the ground floor, I knock on the door belonging to Marvin, the maintenance guy at the Monterey Apartments, but he can't tell me anything other than to confirm that Richard Thompson has got long, black, greasy hair and has had a guest recently with short brown hair staying with him recently. Well, that sounds like our two guys, right? He's got long, black, greasy hair. That's Richard. That sounds like the guy driving the cab that Jacob hopped in. And then the guest with short brown hair, that could be Jacob. Circle marker C1. And he says he has had a guest recently. That seems to be in conflict with what the guy at the door said. All right, let's visit his neighbors. 51068. This is the doorman. Maybe I want to write down here that this told us to circle C1 in case we forget. Okay, 51068. Let's talk to the neighbors. Okay, Billups, J. Billups, no time passes. I knock on the door, there's no answer. So that was a wash. That's still 10:30. Okay, let's try his other next door neighbor. I see. Now we've got an entry. Here's Ivanov. I knock on the door of 2E. I see a flash of light from the peephole, then a pause. The door opens and I see the shape of a bearded old man in the shadows. In, he says. I step into the dark hallway. My nose twists at the smell of sweat and stale air. Is about the robbers? He asks me without prompting. What do you know about the robbery? I ask. Walls very thin, like paper. I hearded them next door, apartment 2D. They robbery someone, yes? What did you hear? I ask. I hearded man next door and his friend talking about robbing store. Both of them? Yes, both, he says. Bad men, both. Can you tell me about the men in 2D? What do they look like? Ask Marvin downstairs. I stay inside, not see, only hear. Bad voices, bad men. What about now, I ask. Are they still there next door? Only one man there now. Other men left, not come back. And with that, he ushers me out the door. Circle marker C1. So we've already circled marker C1. That's not unusual that we get told to circle it twice. I just circled it again for no reason. Once it's circled, it's circled. Okay, but now we've got some information that actually both men aren't next door. Of course, we don't know which one is next door, but this does make it less attractive as a place to send the police. However, this does seem to confirm that these two men are both involved in this robbery. That may be all the proof we need to accuse Jacob and his cousin Richard of the robbery. I think maybe the next step for us is to try to track down the cab company in Central Harlem, since Richard also worked for the cab company. We could also check out the ice cream store and the medicated earplugs, but let's focus on our case and try to find a taxi cab company servicing Central Harlem. So here I see Central Harlem yellow cab. 75502. That seems like a good candidate for us. 75502. Maybe if we don't get a hit, we'll come back to this, see if there's another cab company in Harlem, but that looks like about what we want. Okay, here's 75502. Let's see how that goes. Yeah, Jacob drives for us, says the middle-aged balding man with massive Coke bottle glasses who's standing outside of the 115th Street Depot with cane in hand. Him and his cousin Richard, they're off today, but they'll both be in on Monday morning at 9 a.m. to pick up their paychecks. Circle marker B1. Okay, so it feels like this might be the last piece of information we need. We know exactly where the two of them are going to be on Monday morning at 9 a.m., that they're going to be here at the Yellow Cab Central Harlem Depot to pick up their checks. Surely they're not going to miss that. So we've got our culprit, we've got his accomplice, and we know where they're going to be to pick them up. So I think we're probably ready to solve this case. We could spend the next 8 hours just roaming around, talking to other witnesses, visiting the ice cream store, but I think we might have everything we need. So I'm just going to wait out the rest of the day and trigger this 7 p.m. event, and we're going to find out if we forgot anything. So 54291. Okay. It's 7 p.m. on Friday, June 11th, day 2. The final day of your case is ending. The following 2 items must be found, marker B1 and C1, which we did find. So we've got enough to finish up the day. +1 reputation for each of these, and +2 bonus if we found them both. So +2 reputation and another 2 because we found them both before going into overtime. If you've not found both, you go back out in overtime. Otherwise, we go to the evening of day 2, which is page 22. It's 7 p.m. on Friday, June 11th, 1915. Your case is coming to an end. If there are still leads you wish to visit before ending the case, you can go do that, but you'll pay some demerits for that. So if we got to 7 p.m., we found everything, but there was still a place we wanted to go, like we wanted to try to get that ice cream promotion, we could do that with a little bit of overtime penalty. Otherwise, when you're ready to conclude the case and answer questions, go to the conclusion on page 43. So let's turn to 43. Okay, we get a little warning that we're about to read the questions. Only proceed when we're ready to end our investigation. All right, so here we have questions. Who's the robber? What is your evidence against them? So you might say the robber is Jacob Thompson with an accessory, his cousin Richard. Evidence against them? I guess the eyewitness at the bar who saw his face. Maybe the bakery store owner who tells us what happened. Maybe the neighbor to Richard who tells us he overheard them talking about robbery. Was anyone else an accessory? If so, who and how do you know? Okay, well, his cousin Richard is the accessory. We know he matches the description from the newspaper stand guy of who was driving the getaway car. And we heard the neighbor to Richard Thompson overhearing them talking about the robbery. Where and when can the suspects be apprehended? That's the part we just figured out. Central Harlem Taxi Cab Depot, Monday morning. What specific crime should be charged? List any aggravating qualifications, physical harm, threats of violence, use of weapons. So when we started the case, we actually thought he used a knife, but talking to the bakery guy, no, he's the eyewitness who got robbed. He says there was no knife. So probably no threat of violence. So maybe, I guess, just simple robbery. So you could write these down if you wanted to, or just verbalize them like I did. Now let's turn. All right, we get a little bit of an epilogue. I don't think I'm going to read this for you. You can read this for yourself if you want. Late on Friday afternoon, I make my way up the steps of 240 Center Street, walk through the large archway into police headquarters. So we meet our father. He asks us to recap the case. Then we tell him the story of how we solved it. Were you scared? Did you catch anyone lying to you? So and so. Everyone's listening in. So we get that little end story. We get a little epilogue. Back in 1935, standing over my kitchen table with the empty glass of whiskey in my hand, back up on the step stool, back goes the bottle and the unwashed glass alongside it. So this is just the epilogue back in 1935. We've been remembering this first case. I'm not going to read that. You can read that if you want story. Then we've got an explanation of the scoring, how to calculate our score. So here are answers to the questions. Question 1, Jacob Thompson was the robber. He was confidently identified by the bartender at the Mulberry Street bar who witnessed him fleeing the scene. How do we know about his accomplice? Richard Thompson was the getaway driver. Circumstantial evidence, the description from the newspaper guy, the maintenance guy, and the guy who overheard. Give yourself full credit if you visited his neighbor and connected the visual description. Where could he be found? Max score of 25. So he had been staying with his cousin. His current whereabouts are unknown. Neighbor tells us Jacob is not currently in the apartment. However, they're both expected to be at the Central Harlem Yellow Cab offices Monday morning. They're unlikely to skip that. This would be the best opportunity to apprehend them. If you said to arrest them at the apartment, give yourself a few points of partial credit. And then how should they be charged? According to the bakery owner who was robbed, there was no weapon, so armed robbery would not be appropriate. A charge of simple unarmed robbery is more appropriate. Then we've got some penalties if we took any demerit hints, which we didn't. And we would get 5 points for any culture. Probably if we had checked out that ice cream store, maybe we would have gotten some culture. That's it. So our score would be calculated from that. Somehow we didn't get any bonus for reputation. That feels like an oversight. All right, and then you can see in the case book, common for my cases at least, a little postscript about when I wrote the case, what I was trying to do. You could read that in the PDF if you want, and then a sample full walkthrough of how you might solve it. So if you got stuck, this sort of walks through how another detective might have solved the case. So there you have it, a walkthrough of the gentle intro demo case for New York Noir, and a little tutorial about how to play New York Noir. These are the same rules you would use to play the more advanced cases. There are only a few things that didn't get touched on here. The use of the fingerprint and criminal history directories. Those directories have instructions on how to use them. We didn't visit any contacts or allies. We might use that list in the more advanced cases just to visit some friends and talk if we get stuck. There is one more mechanic in the reverse directory that we never used in this case, which is the canvas action. Occasionally, if you're searching a crime scene, you can see in the reverse directory that for every block in every neighborhood, there's an entry at the bottom that says, canvas the area around the block. So maybe if someone dropped evidence on the street, in an alley, whatever, you could do that action to do an extensive search. When you do that, an hour always passes, even if there's not an entry. Frequently there isn't, but that is one more action you can take. But there's an easy case. They won't all be this easy. Frequently you will get stuck, and frequently you will get penalized by reaching the end of the day having missed some marker that you have to go back in overtime to get. If you do get a chance to play one of the cases, I'd like to hear about it. Hopefully this teaches you the basic idea of how to play. I'll see you in the next video.